Today I'm going to talk about Green Mile. Green Mile was a very, very popular movie. I guess about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm not sure. Maybe more. Maybe longer. But I think Korean people were very interested in it, and I think it deserves some commentary. When I comment on a movie, it's the result of my having watched it at school. That is, in some of my classes, not AP, not honors, but normal English classes, I watch movies, and the students watch movies, and then I test them on them. For example, tomorrow, maybe Wednesday, today's a holiday, Labor Day in American culture. But on Wednesday, my seniors, my regular, normal seniors, will take a test on the first movie that they've watched this year already, Excalibur. Maybe I'll tell about that sometime, because really I think in its way it's a great movie. In a way it's a more serious movie than Green Mile, and I'll try to explain. Green Mile was written by Stephen King, and Stephen King has sold millions and millions of books. Now he is a master of eerie, weird, horror things too. Bizarre. He is a master of these things. In this case, I kind of wonder. I'll explain to you why. The main character is played by Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks, I'm willing to say, is a great actor. I think Tom Hanks is really a great actor, probably the best male actor in American filmmaking. I don't know who's better. He's so excellent. One limitation of his, I think, is that he cannot play a bad guy. He's just too likable. I guess he's a wonderful human being. I've seen him being interviewed, and he's irresistible. But a limitation of him is he can't play a bad guy. A man like Kevin Spacey, whom I discussed in American Beauty, can play good guy or bad guy. Does that make him a better actor? Maybe it does. Maybe it does. But you think about these things, and I'm certainly not a very good... certainly no expert on acting or any of the technical aspects or films generally, but mine is a literary analysis of Green Mile, and I think I have a lot to say about it. Okay, the main character, I'm going to call him Paul, Tom Cruise. I don't remember many names, I'm sorry. Okay, at the beginning of the film, Paul is an old man. He's not Tom Cruise, by the way. And he's living in an old people's home. Nice one, it seems. They are watching something, a movie, I guess, or something on TV. They're watching a clip, let's say, from a film of the 1930s, the early 1930s. Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. You guys are way too young to know about this, but they were very famous, and even in my childhood they were still famous for dancing. Fred Astaire, everyone would say, the greatest dancer that America has ever produced. Dancer for us means tap dancing and ballroom dancing. He's certainly no ballet dancer, but that's okay. Very inventive, very creative. An actor, not very good. I think no one would disagree with that. But certainly charming filmmaker. And he did all his own choreography, blah, blah, blah. So he and Ginger Rogers in a very romantic, they're ballroom dancing across the room in this 1930s, early 1930s film. Okay. Paul is sitting next to an elderly woman who is not so elderly. Clearly they are friends. And Paul becomes very tearful in watching this movie and has to leave the room. There are maybe 40 other elderly people watching the film. He has to leave the room. He's moved. She, Ellen maybe, no, Ellen's his wife later, so let's call her Jane, I don't know. Jane leaves the room with him to make sure he's okay. Very nice. And this is really the proper beginning of the film. They go to the dining room maybe, sit by a window, and the rest of the film, until the very end, is Paul's narration, Paul's telling Jane about events of the past. Okay, now I'll get to that at the end. So, we go back to the year 1935. Now, if the film was made in 1999, 1935 is 64 years earlier. If we're attentive, most people aren't, and I don't think I was the first time. Until you see the ending, it's not striking. But 64 years ago, Paul says that he was, I think, either 35 or 40. If he was 40, then he's now 104. He's now 104. If he was 35, he's now 99. I guess that's what he is. He's no 99. So, that's okay. I mean, he's supposed to be in the film. It's not a mistake. Back we go. In 1935, Paul was a prison guard at a prison in Mississippi or Louisiana? Louisiana. Deep South Louisiana. He was the chief officer of a section of the prison called the Green Mile, hence the title. The Green Mile, because it was a section of the prison all green, was reserved for prisoners on death row. But these prisoners would be executed sometime. In modern times, death row is populated by prisoners who have been condemned to death, to die, but very often they have appealed and they can stay on death row for 10 years, 15 years even, during the appeal process. This is not the case in 1935. The men in that section are going to die by electrocution. They will be electrocuted. Chair, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Paul has 3 men working for him. 2 of these men are his friends, and they're very kind. And Paul is very kind. One I'd like to call Ned. He needs a name. The second one I'll call Tom. They're kind men. But it's 1935. It's the Depression. And any person will be very careful about keeping his job. So all these men are too old to be in the military. That's true too. So they're at least 35. The third helper of Paul is Percy. Now, Percy is a strange guy. Percy knows the governor, or his mother knows the governor of the state. Percy knows some people higher up. He has some advantages. And Percy is a little man, and he's mean. He's a mean guy. He's a sadist, really, I think. It's not an accident that he's a small man. Small men, I think in American culture, and it may be true in Korea too, I think it probably is, must be. Small men in our culture automatically have something to prove. It's a rare small man who can avoid that state of mind. Why? Because they're ridiculed or dominated by larger people, and they have something to prove. Now, historically, Napoleon and Julius Caesar and Hitler were small men, and people who think that this is true, and I believe it, it's often true, find in these cases, typical cases of small men who have something to prove. Sometimes they're geniuses. If they are political leaders, then they can be dangerous, as in a sense those three men were. Whether this is true or not, Percy is a small man who knows people higher up in the system and takes advantage of it. Okay, now it's time to really enter the film. One day, into the Green Mile, well, we hear these nice men are playing cards, I don't know, and suddenly someone calls in, come and see this, you've got to see this, you've got to see this. They go out, a prison truck has arrived, and out of that prison truck steps a gigantic black man. He is a giant. He's huge, and he's powerful. But he's kind of childlike in his manners, too, as he looks around, a little bit dazed. He's chained, he's got big chains on. He's not going anywhere. Though if he grabbed a man, I think he could kill a man pretty quickly. But he's not killing anyone, and they bring him into the prison. They bring him into his cell, and then they take off the chains. And Paul says, "What's your name, boy?" Boy is kind of a demeaning way to refer to any black man in the past. And if anyone calls a black man boy in modern culture, is almost as bad as nigger. Insulting. "What's your name, boy?" But it was normal in 1935, and really it wasn't even necessarily bad. And Paul is a good man. My name is John Coffey. Coffey, Coffey. Not like the drink, he says. It's pretty clear from the way he talks even that that's the only word he can spell. He's illiterate, but he can spell his name. "Now, you're not going to cause me any problems, are you, boy?" "No, sir. No, boss." He calls Paul boss from the start of the film. It's very touching. The film is... I've forgotten that. The film is very moving. It's a very moving film. But it's flawed. Okay, so... And Paul removes the chains, and everyone is glad to get out, but it's very clear. Paul's a pretty good judge of people. And Paul understands right away that John Coffey is a special human being. Okay, so nothing much happens though, but John Coffey is there for having killed, murdered, sexually also, and murdered two little girls. One maybe 9 and one 7, two sisters. Paul gets interested in this case, and because John Coffey is a special human being, reads about it, the text about what happened, and the trial, and the man John Coffey are just, they are irreconcilable. It's impossible that John Coffey did what the text says he did, and what the case says he did. But Paul also reads the script of the trial. And nowhere in the trial, I think, does John Coffey deny having done it. He doesn't deny it. And his lawyer, so Paul goes to see his lawyer, drives far away. No, I better say first. Paul has a bladder ailment. He suffers painfully when he has to urinate. This is used for a little bit comic relief because Tom Hanks is so likable and such a sympathetic actor. And his character is very sympathetic, of course. But when Paul urinates, it's very painful, and often he can't urinate. Now, a bladder infection like this could kill a person. After all, if he can't urinate, he will eventually die. The infection will grow and he'll die. He also can't have intercourse with his wife We meet his wife, very kind, gentle, wonderful, and certainly loves him a lot. But I guess he hasn't seen the doctor, or the doctor can't help. Maybe the doctor can't help. So everybody's concerned about this. John Coffey, the black giant, John Coffey, remember the name, he's the main character, along with Paul. John Coffey somehow learns about Paul's infection. One day, now the Green Mile consists of maybe 5 or 6 cells on one side, and then a big space, a big corridor or space, and then 5 or 6 cells on the other side too. But the distance between these is about, it's at least 40 feet, more than 10 meters. Okay, one day John Coffey is standing at his cell by the bars. Paul comes walking by, and John Coffey says, "Come here, boss." Paul wonders, comes over, closer. It's a big, boy, I gotta stop this. It's a big moment in the movie, because for Paul to step closer means he trusts him. Okay, he trusts him. So Paul comes over close enough, and John Coffey grabs him. I think maybe he grabs him by the back of the neck and pulls him to him. And he reaches down and touches down there the bladder, where the bladder must be. Very, very powerful moment. Now I think Paul is not afraid for his life, and the watcher of the film doesn't believe, can't believe that John Coffey would hurt Paul. It's psychologically impossible. But what happens is, does he kiss him? I'm not sure he kisses him, but he comes very close to his face, and it's like he inhales whatever is bad, corrupted, evil, what's hurting Paul. And inhaling, and we see this, it's like sawdust, black or dark sawdust, terrible stuff. Or if you like, it's like flies, like dead flies, or the maggots, that's what it is, the corrupted material that produces flies. He inhales all these grains, and then he lets Paul go, and Paul staggers back. He doesn't know what's happened to him, and John Coffey staggers back too, and sits down on his bench, on his bed there, maybe even lies down. But what has happened is he has removed the infection and the corrupted matter, whatever it is, inside Paul, and Paul is miraculous. In short, it's a miracle. A healing miracle. Paul is healed. Now this is comical. It's made comical a little bit in the film, because Paul then goes home rejuvenated, and it's charming, inoffensive and charming, and he and his wife have sex together. In fact, they have sex for 12 hours. It's wonderful. That's a real good man-woman relationship. Okay, now if we're serious, we realize that that John Coffey is either an angel or a saint. He is a miracle worker, a thaumaturge, good word, a miracle worker. I would say he's an angel, because he has superhuman knowledge too. Okay, now there have been a lot of angel movies. Hollywood has produced a lot of angel movies in the past 10 years. I won't go down the list of them, but the list is quite tiresome, really. And we have to grasp that this is another angel movie. Sorry, it's another angel movie. But this is kind of a special one. Paul now fully realizes what a remarkable man John Coffey is. And now he takes the trouble to drive 100 miles, in those days a long way, out in the country to visit the lawyer who had defended John Coffey, to try to find out what happened here, what's going on. Now, the scene is very interesting, but the lawyer explains to Paul that he did all he could, but he didn't have enough information. He tried to defend John Coffey, but it's pretty clear that the lawyer doesn't really realize who John Coffey is either. The lawyer didn't, and he tells what happened, that John Coffey was found by a posse, P-O-S-S-E-E, a group of men looking for a criminal. They find John Coffey out in a field, out in the woods, with the dead bodies of the two little girls. He's sitting on the ground, the two little girls are like this, they're dead, and John Coffey is screaming. That's the word. What should we say? He's screaming in, let's say, spiritual pain. Spiritual pain. And gradually we see, and this is the real point, of course these men arrive, they're all of them with guns. It's a miracle that they didn't just shoot him right there, but they didn't. They arrested him, they probably hit him around a little bit, but he doesn't resist them. In fact, his scream is the reason why they found him. This is not a man who killed those two girls. This is a man who is in moral, spiritual pain about the terrible things that happen in the world. Now, Paul comes to understand this a little bit, and Paul comes to see, gradually in the film, but I'll say this now, gradually in the film he comes to see that John Coffey wants to die. He wants to die because he has seen a lot of terrible things. Many terrible things like this. And in a sense, his curse is that he cannot forget these things. Other people, mostly we can forget terrible things that we see. Even if we have been directly involved, most people have the capacity to forget the terrible things they've seen. John Coffey can't. Okay, here we go. So, now the events unfold. Percy, we meet a couple of other prisoners in the other cells on Green Mile. One is I'll call him Mr. Bojangles. He's a charming little man. And we also meet a little mouse. There's a little mouse. And that little mouse starts coming to see Mr. Bojangles. That's not the man's name. In fact, that's the name he gives the mouse. Mr. Bojangles, a typical Louisiana song, famous kind of folk song of Louisiana. And this little mouse starts coming to this little balding man, who I guess killed somebody, and becomes his friend. And he trains the little mouse, and this is important in the film. He trains the little mouse to roll something like a ball, and he can roll that ball up and down, and then he comes to him and he sits in his hand and he runs across his shoulders, and Mr. Bojangles gives him a little cheese or food or something. It's very nice. Okay, now Percy, the mean guard. Percy hates that mouse. I won't bother telling why, but he hates that mouse. Okay, now, before I tell you what happens there, another character is, I'm going to call him Billy Bob. Billy Bob is a mean guy. He is a sadist, a full sadist. Percy is only a part sadist. A full sadist enjoys cruelty, enjoys inflicting pain, or seeing pain inflicted. Billy Bob is a full sadist. And he's in there for having killed somebody, and he causes lots of problems. He's not a powerful guy, he's a little guy, but he's tricky, and he will pretend to be sick, and then he will grab guards and maybe bite their ears even, and they will beat him up, but he enjoys it. He's a mean character. And Percy and Billy Bob have an immediate hatred of each other, though Billy Bob kind of just hates everybody. But he laughs and laughs and laughs. It's his laughter that's his characteristic. But he's the kind of sadist who has a special insight into how people work, what people are. And he understands Percy. He's the kind of evil, and evil has this capacity. He's the kind of evil person who can look at a Percy and understand him right away. And some very good people have that capacity too. Most of us in the middle require experience. We have to see and put together and think. But Billy Bob has an intuitive grasp of maybe other evil people. Maybe. And probably of good people too. Okay, now we're ready. Percy, it's kind of a long subplot, but Percy one day sees the mouse and he steps on it with his big boot, crushes it. Everyone else is horrified, and Paul especially is horrified. Everyone's horrified. How could you do that? But he understands, because Percy is such a despicable human being. Despicable. Okay, but John Coffey says, "Boss, bring me the mouse." The mouse appears to be dead, but it's not dead. There's a little breath in the mouse. We can see that. Bring me the mouse. Now, the other guys only know from what Paul said that John Coffey healed Paul from his bladder infection. Paul saw it. Paul was the recipient, the person who was healed. And so he picks up the mouse, crushed little body, bleeding too, brings it to John Coffey. In short, John Coffey heals it, and the mouse runs away. It's another miracle. This time everyone saw it. Everyone. Percy included. Percy now Paul and Ned, let's say, and Tom now get kind of rough with Percy. Paul hits him a few times even, and everybody who watches the film is glad. But Percy says, "Be careful. I know the governor, and I could have you fired." And so they're a little cautious. Now, there are two main events that happen from here on in the film. Mr. Bojangles is going to be executed, and Percy insists on being the person who does whatever is necessary to prepare him for execution. And he wants to give the signal. In other words, he loves this. He loves it. Now, Paul trains him, and we see one must take a sponge, put the sponge in water. It's got to be wet. The sponge goes on the top of the head. Then the metal cap goes on the person. The person is tied to the chair, and the electricity is going to come through the head. It's going to attack the brain and kill the brain, kill the person. The sponge must be wet for the electricity to spread through the body and kill the person very quickly. They explain. So Percy understands all that. Now it's time for the execution. But Percy pretends to make the sponge wet, but doesn't make it wet. No one notices. No one notices. There's a small audience, 10, 12 people there. The people who were probably the loved ones of the person who was killed. And most of them are glad to see a person executed, the person who killed their loved one, after all, supposedly. So, the execution starts to take place. Turn on the electricity, turn it on, but the man is suffering tremendously, but he's not dying. He's simply suffering from burns. And we even see smoke rising, which is probably the brain or the skull. The killing of the man must take a full minute. When it should take a second, it takes a minute. Now, this is terrible. This was embarrassing to the warden, the head of the prison, embarrassing to Paul and his crew, and everyone's embarrassed. And Percy loved it, of course. He's a sadist, and we really hate him. We hate him. He's so cruel. Okay. Then, the warden is a kind man, and his wife is suffering from brain cancer, or brain tumor, brain cancer maybe. It's a slow process. She's losing her mind. She often has periods when she screams terrible words, things she would never say, uncharacteristic, and it's a very painful spectacle for the husband who loves her very much. She's losing her mind slowly, but what can he do? There's nothing he can do. And Paul and the warden are friends, personal friends too, and so always we find out, how is she? Sometimes okay, but getting gradually worse. And it's a terrible thing. Okay. Paul gets an idea. Now, he can't ask the warden this, but he decides he's going to do it. He and Ned and Tom are going to remove John Coffey from the prison, drive him to the home of the warden out in the country, nice house, no one else around, deep in the woods. And John Coffey is going to heal this woman. Okay, it's very powerful. Okay, they take him out there. Imagine it's midnight maybe. Oh, they have to, first they drug Billy Bob, the sadistic prisoner, and they also drug Percy, because if either of them knew about it, they would both spoil it, they would tell people, because they're sadistic people, they're so cruel and mean. But everything goes pretty well. So the scene of taking John Coffey out there in a pickup truck, he sits in the back, chained of course. Then the truck arrives, it's late at night, the warden comes out. Who's there? Who's there? He's got a rifle. It's me, Jim, Paul. Oh, what are you doing out here now? And then suddenly he sees this black giant, whom he probably knows from the prison. He wants to shoot him, but the whole thing very... He must be puzzled, of course, because here are these very good people bringing this black killer, this giant, in the middle of the night to his house. What is happening here? So he obviously he doesn't shoot John Coffey. John Coffey just walks up to him and calmly pushes the gun aside. I'm not going to hurt your boss. No. In short, I mean, it's a long scene and very powerful, but I'm just going to summarize it. In short, of course, John... just a minute. Okay, John Coffey goes in there and he heals this woman. Now, to heal her, he must kiss her. Deep South, Louisiana, black man, proper white woman, inconceivable. But let's say the spiritual and moral authority of John Coffey is so immense that everyone just lets it happen. He kisses her and he inhales all that infected matter, whatever it is, the brain tumor, evil, whatever we want to call it. And then he's exhausted and he lies on the floor. She is exhausted. It's almost sexual. She is exhausted, but then she's healed. They take John Coffey back. He lies down exhausted from his ordeal. But bear in mind, he now contains all this stuff. And he knows. Now his time of death is coming pretty close too. Okay, then that was a climaxing scene, but the real climax comes when one day he calls Percy, the mean guy. He calls Percy over to him. Come here, boss. Now Percy is fascinated. It's kind of hypnotized. John Candy, of course, has that power. And Percy comes near. He has a gun, too, of course. And John Coffey grabs him by the back of the neck and breathes into Percy's mouth. And Percy is just dumbfounded. Opens his mouth and he takes in all that terrible, virulent matter, and it's like he is stunned, and he backs up, stunned, and everyone else saw this happen. Stop, John Coffey, stop! But no one is going to shoot anybody here, especially because they know now that John Coffey is a miracle worker. So then he lets Percy go. Then Percy walks down the corridor like in a trance, and he stops where Billy Bob's cell is, and Billy Bob taunts him, as he always taunts him, calls him a sissy, let's say, or an effeminate person, or calls him a bad name. Percy takes out his gun, shoots Billy Bob 6 times before anyone can do anything. But it turns out that Percy is now an idiot. He will spend the rest of his life in a psychiatric ward. By the way, he was scheduled to be transferred there, and he would have hurt a lot of people there too. It's a delicious moment of justice that now Paul then the world has just been rid miraculously of two monsters. Now we can see that in this world, in this film, we have all good guys and bad guys. It's good guys and bad guys. It's a wonderful film, but psychologically it's simplistic. Good guys and bad guys. Are there such evil people? Sure. Are there people as good as Paul and those guys? Yeah, I suppose there are anyway. But it's a limitation of the film. And I'll tell you another big limitation a little later. Okay, so it's the night when John Coffey, before John Coffey will be executed, Paul goes to him. He feels terrible. Okay. Too sentimental. It is too sentimental, and for that reason, maybe I can control myself a little bit. But Paul says the climactic words. Okay, when I go before God to be judged by God, what am I going to say to defend, to justify having put to death having put you to death, having put John Coffey to death? He says it better than that, but I can't say it. Okay. John Coffey says, "Don't worry, boss." And then he tells him, Paul wants to know, what happened out there in that field with those little girls? I know you did not kill those little girls. What happened? What really happened? And John Coffey, they're sitting in the cell now together. Friends. And he tells him what happened. But he doesn't tell him. He grabs him again. He grabs him. And poor Paul is, what? He's terrified, but he's not. And what John Coffey does is transmit to him a vision of what happened. And what happened was, the vision that John Coffey, can't get out of his mind. And what happened was that Billy Bob worked on that farm. Now this is totally incredible. Billy Bob, everyone knew, okay, Billy Bob worked on that farm. And he, cruel, mean man, saw those little girls, worked for that family. And he had gone late at night, cut the screen, walked into the little girl's room. And it's brilliant, actually, with the brilliance of evil, true evil maybe. He tells the girls to be quiet. And he says to the one girl, "If you make a sound, I'll kill her, your sister." They're very close. They love each other a lot. They play together all the time. "If you make a sound, I will kill her. If you make a sound, I will kill her." Wow. Evil. Brilliant evil. And of course, neither girl will make a sound. He then leads them out into the field. I think apparently he rapes them and he kills them. A mean, terrible death. And John Coffey, from where? Nobody knew where. In the trial, where did he come from? No one knew. An angel. John Coffey then saw this as an angel and was found screaming in pain. Spiritual pain at what had happened, what those girls had gone through. Now Paul has seen it. Okay, the next day, John Coffey is put to death. But it's kind of beautiful. Okay, now, that's the end of the movie proper. We return to present time, which is Paul, 65 years later, telling the events to Jane at the old people's home. And Jane says, "But wait a minute, that means you must be 100 years old. You're not 100 years old. Do you have a minute? I'm going to take you out to the woods and show you something." This is totally, the verisimilitude is lacking here completely, and a bigger flaw is about to happen. He takes her out into the woods, deep into the woods, to a cottage, abandoned, apparently, very dark, very dusty, no one lives there. Takes her in there and takes her to a cigar box That cigar box was the box that Mr. Bojangles had kept for the little mouse. Okay? Now, takes Jane in there to see. What's there is the little mouse. So, little Mr. Mouse is now 66 years old, 67 years old, running around, still rolling a ball up and down. What's the point? The point is that those who have been touched by John Coffey live a real long time. Unrealistic. Now, the theme that Stephen King is developing here is to try to lend some dignity and some moral, some literary greatness to a lame work, is the theme called The Wandering Jew. The Wandering Jew was a medieval myth, legend, according to which a Jew who watched Christ as Christ carried the cross up the hill, Calvary, Golgotha, where Christ was crucified, laughed at Christ, mocked Christ and laughed at Christ, and Christ cursed the man with the following curse: I curse you to spend eternity until the end of time on this earth. You may not die, you cannot die, and you must tell and retell your story. Well, it turns out that Paul has the curse of the wandering Jew. But wait, why is Paul cursed? Because he put John Coffey to death. But wait, he didn't want to put John Coffey to death, and Paul is a profoundly good person. So this is very weak, very lame. And this explains why Paul is still alive, because he's cursed to tell this story over and over again. But, I mean, come on. Paul didn't do anything wrong, and no human being would say he did. And besides that, John Coffey said, don't worry, boss, you're doing me a favor. You must put me to death. I want to die. I need to die. I have to die. Because to live and recall all these things, not just that incident, but many others, is just a terrible curse for John Coffey. It was a blessing, a kindness that he had done to John Coffey. So the film is flawed, and I wanted you to understand what really happens in the film and why it's flawed. And yet, I think, in my opinion anyway, it's impossible not to love the film. But a great film is certainly not. That's all. Thank you. Thank you.